Today's red test is a motorcycle that we are practically the first to try. It aspires to Route 66 but reaches us through the Silk Road. It is Chinese, it is from Qj Motors, and it is a power cruiser with a 4-cylinder engine, SRV 600V. A glance suggests that Qj Motors has taken some inspiration, but that's understandable, especially when entering a sector that is still relatively unexplored. Does the LED front headlight remind you of anyone? Yes, and not just him, but it must be acknowledged that the SRV 600V is a motorcycle that does not go unnoticed. Little flash and a lot of metal, starting with the steel frame, the adjustable Marzocchi suspensions, better in the front, speaking of the fork, and adjustable shock absorbers, only in preload, and then a low seat and a lightweight design, very close to the road. SRV 600V, power cruiser 100%. They looked across the ocean for inspiration and created, in this case from China, their best interpretation of this motorcycle concept. I sit down and make my first observation related to the weight, 228 kilo, every time you ride a motorcycle of this category. You always have the feeling of lifting a nice pile of muscle. In this case, the weight distribution is such that it is really very easy to lift it and put it in an upright position. The riding position is good when starting from a stop with a seat height of only 720 mm. It is supportive and comfortable even for long distances, featuring a nice stop that prevents forward and backward movement and allows for a good triangulation. The leg is neither too bent nor too far forward, and the handlebar is quite straight in this case, which can be adjusted. However, let's say that the initial setup provided directly by the manufacturer is more than comfortable. Taking the starting position, let's say I'm preparing to ride, what is immediately recognizable in this case are the made in USA stylistic elements, starting from the large non-adjustable levers on the handlebars to the chunky black electrical blocks that contain all the basic information, along with a small and essential circular display that is very easy to read. I would like to point out, beyond the easy to manage settings, the ability to connect a smartphone via Bluetooth, the indication of tire temperature, operating temperature, and also the pressure. So here's a little gem related to this power cruiser. I'm pleased to point out a particular feature. The foot peg, both for the brake lever and the gear shift, comes with a heel guard that prevents contact with the exhaust, which are also protected. Additionally, there is a beautiful eccentric that allows for fine adjustment of both the brake lever and the gear shift lever. In all of this, it is worth noting the presence of the 90-degree 4-cylinder engine with a displacement of 561 cubic centimeters, a true exception.
Especially in this segment, although we cannot overlook the VMAX, the first 1200 and the latest 1800 today. The only maxi power cruiser on the market is the Ducati Diavel V4. And now I'll let you hear how the V4 runs, which is a one-of-a-kind engine. As mentioned, there are few frills and clear details. Everything is simple, including the management of the circular LCD display. The menu is easy to navigate with a dual button, and the structure allows you to easily reach each item with the possible modifications. Let's note down some additional details. The braking system, equipped with Bosch ABS, features two 300mm diameter discs at the front with a radial caliper and a single 260mm disc at the rear. The suspension travel is really minimal, with 100 cm for the fork and only 59 mm for the dual shock absorber. Millimeters, the dual shock absorber. The front tire is 130/90/16 and the rear is 180/65, both 16 inches. The fuel tank has a capacity of 16 liters, and it is worth noting the choice of a maintenance-free silent belt final drive in the tranquility of a road trip where the silence of these landscapes somewhat envelops you. The only true companion, the only real voice, is that of the V4, of the SRV 600V. A 561 Semi-3 V4, a small engine, but it gives 68 HP and 54 Nm of torque. That's 68 horsepower and 54 Newton meters of torque. How does it perform? Well, despite the data and the weight of 228 kilo seeming a bit contradictory, right from the start, the clutch is comfortable and smooth, and the throttle response is very precise. I must say that the engine, the 4-cylinder AV, has a good liveliness. It starts off strong, doesn't struggle, and shifts gears quite well. The gearbox performs quite well. It is smooth and fairly precise. You can feel a slight notch, both when shifting up and down, but the engagements are always very delicate, and there is never any struggle. I mentioned the throttle response, which is direct and very communicative with the rear wheel, so every time you touch the gas, you get a nice response. The engine is interesting and in some ways surprising because it is capable, if desired, of revving over 11,000 RPM, although the limiter is set at 10,500 RPM. However, it vibrates very little, which means they have really done a good job with the balancing, making the ride and even long distances very, very comfortable. If I may make a comment, there is still a bit of on-off, quite noticeable, especially in the lower gears and when accelerating through a corner, which can be felt a bit. For the rest, surprisingly, I must say that this 4-cylinder engine, which somewhat sets the rules for this power cruiser from Qj Motor, is perhaps the distinguishing element,
which is more enjoyable when riding. The handling of the SRV 600V, first of all, I note the weight, 228 kilos, which is really well distributed over the two axles, and the low center of gravity also helps with maneuvers from a standstill. However, I must say that the steering angle is not the best. It is quite wide, and to maneuver on a road like this, you need to do it in 2 stages. That said, it has a very good ground contact, so there is no problem. Even if a rider of shorter stature decides to access this Chinese power cruiser, from a cycling perspective, it features adjustable suspensions with a 41 millimeter fork that works quite well, adjustable in both compression and rebound. While at the rear we find an adjustable preload system with dual shock absorbers. In my opinion, the rear suspension is a bit too stiff, which transmits too much of the road's roughness to the rider's back. However, it can be adjusted using the specific tool that I currently do not have, so I was unable to modify the setting. Riding dynamics. It has a decent ground clearance, and even when going at a good speed, the foot pegs do not touch the ground immediately, which saves a trip to the mechanic. However, what is convincing is, despite the front tire being 130/90/16, which definitely favors long highways, the motorcycle's handling is pleasant. It is not extremely quick to lean, or rather, the initial part of the lean is easy and quite swift. You notice this when navigating a roundabout or moving in the city. It becomes a bit more challenging to lean when the speed increases. That said, the overall feeling is good. I note that the heat emitted by the 4-cylinder engine is felt a bit at low speeds, but on a day like today, at the end of July with 35 degrees, as soon as you cover the first few meters, I honestly have to say that this engine has a good release and passes behind the legs almost without you noticing. Now we are more or less at 25 km/h, and I must say that it is not felt at all. Regarding the brake performance, I recall that the levers are not adjustable. They are a bit chunky, and the grips on the handlebars are also somewhat thick. I would have preferred them to be slightly smaller and at least have an adjustable brake lever. That said, the performance of the dual 300mm discs is in line with the custom world. The braking is soft, but it becomes too aggressive if you apply pressure. When braking firmly with the front lever in an emergency, the ABS, developed in collaboration with Bosch, intervenes and helps keep the motorcycle very stable, thanks also to its length. Therefore, from this perspective, I must say that the performance of the brakes is more than good. Perhaps if this power cruiser were equipped with tires from another brand with greater grip, we might have a better performance.
Better cornering descent,
and an even more responsive braking system that easily reaches the locking limit. But the ABS, in short, does its job.
Waves crash, pale shore, black holes.
Therefore, it's better to ride straight than to lean, although it should be noted that there is a decent ground clearance despite the minimum height of the SRV 600V being only 14 cm. The dynamic behavior is also a result of the tire selection. High sidewall and small rim, with little inclination to lean, at least after the first handful of degrees. In return, stability at medium speed is guaranteed.
Here come the tempest.
About 200 kilometers plus. Another 70 or so will take us from the hills of Pavese back to the office in Milan, accompanied by the SRV 600V. Today's route served to understand, amidst a bit of city, some ring road, a stretch of highway, and quite a few beautiful curves around here, how this power cruiser, equipped with the V4 I have already mentioned, behaves. Many positive confirmations, and in fact, a considerable surprise, starting from the engine, which is truly the core, and also determines, if you will, almost all the characteristics and the character of this motorcycle. Generous despite its small displacement. I mentioned 561 Sim3, 68 HP, 54 Nm of torque. In short, these are mid-range values perfectly consistent with the philosophy of a motorcycle that does not aim for high performance, but still generates a pleasant euphoria when riding it and revving the engine up to almost the red zone, which I did once just to see how far it could go. The character change is noticeable above 6,000 RPM, but I confess that I have mostly ridden it between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM, relying a bit on the decent torque and easily selecting the right gear to move both uphill and downhill, even in the slower corners. What could be improved? We are now reaching the conclusions of this first contact. As I mentioned in the section related to the chassis, perhaps the behavior of the rear suspension is a bit harsh in its response. It might be enough to slightly soften the preload to have a bit more comfort. I was not convinced by the rear view mirrors, partly due to their size, partly because I am not particularly attached to the external mirror, but inevitably, if they had placed the mirrors in a traditional way, they would have ruined the aesthetics of a motorcycle that should first and foremost be known, seen, observed, and appreciated for its symmetry. The dual exhaust on the right, the dual exhaust on the left, the prominent V of the V4, the beautiful fork with the thick tire 130/90. In short, there are many elements that favor a completely new design. This demonstrates that made in China products and Chinese technicians are certainly not standing still. Rather, they are indulging in often unconventional motor solutions, something the Japanese stopped doing many years ago. This means that from the Far East, we can expect to see many interesting innovations in the coming years, just as we did last year at ICMA. Qj Motor is one of the most striking examples currently on everyone's lips, with a range of over 20 motorcycle models, specifically in the custom range. In addition to the SRV 600V with a displacement of 600cc, there are also two smaller models, a 300cc twin cylinder and a 125cc single cylinder. In short, these are the very first impressions of riding the latest novelty from Qj, of which I repeat we are perhaps the first to officially test it in Italy. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, do so. Follow us on our website www.redlive.it and also subscribe to all our social channels. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We are producing a lot of material. The excuse, given the wonderful super summer day, is to wish you good holidays once again, and we will see you soon with another test.